Welcome back. Today we have Professor Kyle Anderson from Clemson University in South Carolina. Kyle has a background, an interesting combined background in both accounting and technology. As well, he's both a practitioner and spent years in academia. So there's a combination of different fields which he's able to provide together into some interesting insights. Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, good to be here. I'm real excited. The kind of neat thing about my career, I entered public accounting in the mid-'80s after spending a year teaching at Furman University, where I realized I couldn't teach accounting unless I went out and did it. And so I entered public accounting and quickly realized that everything was paper-based and started embracing technology at that point. And so I've been involved with training not only employees and students and colleagues in using technology, but myself. And it's really made my life a lot of fun. So,
Kyle, if we separate students coming up with solutions and their implementation, and you've probably seen this in accounting as well, as where a student may come up with a solution of some kind, and then that's as far as they consider it. They don't go beyond that. They don't think in terms of some of the implementation nuances or issues around the environment that they're trying to put this solution into place. And I understand that you've come up with some insights to try and get students outside of that very narrow, here's the solution thinking, to not only address the broader problem, but to bring in creativity and innovation as well.
One of the things I do, and I just did this the other day in class, I gave a math test the first day of class. And after about 6-7 minutes, I tell them to put their phones and calculators away. I pull out an Excel spreadsheet and I solve the problem in about 10 seconds. And, I tell the students, I said, from this point on, calculators are banned. Because what happens is my students will pull out their calculator or phone, they'll get an answer, they'll plug it in, they'll get their points, and then that's it. They kind of tune out. And so what we do with this, I want to take them out of their comfort zone. So, in my classes, I only add, subtract, divide, multiply, copy and paste in Excel. But that tool allows the student to get away from a calculator that is so time-consuming and easy to make mistakes to all of a sudden looking at other options. They get the answer, and then starting right away, I say, okay, what does this answer mean? Is this answer better than another option? And we have a discussion forum. My class, typically in a 50-minute session, they're going to spend 30 minutes working problems and talking with each other. And then we go around and I'll tell each group, I say, okay, what did we discover today between horizontal or vertical analysis or debt to equity or leverage ratios? What did we learn about this option? What's going to work? And it really takes them out of their comfort zone, and they have a lot of fun talking with each other and trading ideas. And that's been a lot of fun, and I get to walk around the room and see what they're thinking about and encourage them to think, way outside the box. And it doesn't matter if they're nutritionists, if they're marketing, if they're management. I get econ. There's all applications in their fields.
Kyle, that sounds as if you're moving the students away from being process oriented, because I've done accounting courses in my past as well, and it tends to be very process oriented. Here's a methodology for determining how we get from the data to how we represent that data in whatever accounting books that we're doing. So it sounds as if you're moving away from having them focus on process to having them think in terms of why are we doing this? And if we think in terms of why are we doing this, then we can come up with a different way of evaluating solutions and comparing solutions. So this sounds as if you're moving them to a higher level of systems thinking. Now, you talked about putting away the tools such as the calculator and Excel. How else do you move them to this systems level thinking?
Well, I always tell them, I said, I don't care how smart you are, how great your idea is. And I've had some phenomenal ideas that got shot down and put on the shelf for years until I figured out how to present it. And so by getting beyond the process and using Excel to gather all this data, they could easily manipulate it and produce a report that made logical sense. And so all of a sudden they go in there and say, here's my idea, here's what I think is going to happen, here's what's good and bad about it, and people can understand it. And so I really push them to, the process is easy. We can make that mechanic. The whole key is, what do you want to present? What's your idea? And so they work together in groups doing that. And it's a lot of fun listening.
Kyle, when you focus the students on that presentation of the results side, I imagine you're thinking in terms of decision makers within organizations who may not understand accounting, where the data comes from and how the analytics are done or the transactions are done on the data, but they want to be able to understand the implications of what they're seeing, because we're seeing in organizations a whole move away from the mere presentation of data to recommendations and understanding of it. And it sounds as if what you're doing aligns with this trend as well of creating an environment so that decision makers know what questions to ask, the implications of the questions, and can be part of the decision-making process. So it sounds as if you're creating this environment so that accounting students can be part of that.
Yeah, and think about three key things when we spend a lot of time on this. The net present value of a project, the payback period of a project, and the degree of operating leverage. All three of those criteria have different implications. If you think about it, I could have a great net present value, but it might have a very long payback period, or it could have a high degree of operating leverage. So that kind of opens up the whole horizon of thinking about, well, if I can get my money back quicker, this project might be better, even though the net present value isn't quite as good, but the degree of operating leverage is less. So that's what I try to get them to do, is think about all of the variations of each option.
Now, Kyle, each one of those variations, I kind of think of that as a multi-dimensional space, that each one of these variations has an attribute that distinguishes it from another variation. And going back to what you were saying earlier about presenting information for decision makers so they can understand implications and implementation, I know that if we try and represent a multi-dimensional space to decision makers, sometimes they can't see all the correlations in the space. How do your students sort of take those ratios and present them in a way that multi-dimensional space is clear to the decision maker or to themselves?
Yeah, what I do is I make the groups argue why, of the 3 or 4 options they're looking at, their idea is better. And they argue why the net present value, degree of operating leverage, or payback period is more important. And we also have a different cutoff rate, cost of capital. And so I make them argue with each other about which option makes the most sense. And then we'll look at a horizontal trend of the company we're examining and say, okay, you picked out an idea. How does that fit in with where the company's at right now?
Now, Carl, what option makes most sense obviously depends on some situational factors of the case or the situation, whatever's going on at the time. How do you create it so that students are able to derive some kind of evaluation or decision criteria so that they can say, yes, this one makes sense? Because making sense or better is very subjective. How can they frame that this option is better based on some kind of evaluation?
Yeah, I pick out problems for my in-class assignments that we have an existing income statement and balance sheet, and I prefer to have, about 3 years worth of data. I like more, but so they can look at those 3 years of data and see whether the company has a good profit margin or whether they have a lot of debt, whether their cash flow looks good. And so they can take those ideas and then plug it back into where the company has been in the past and see which one fits the best.
Now, are you still using Excel for this, or do you have some kind of other versatile tool?
No, I keep it real simple. We use Excel, and for my in-class assignments, I will copy and paste all of the data from the Wiley Plus assignments into the Excel so they don't have to go anywhere. And then instead of them typing in numbers or trying to organize some work, they're analyzing. And so they really quickly do that and start to look at the trends. And starting Friday, I will start doing horizontal analysis with them on problems. And so that way they can take a look at where's the company at right now, what kind of impact did this project have on them, and which looks the best, and they get to argue with each other.
I imagine that students going through this analysis and looking at a variety of tools start in their mind to be able to abstract or generalize their own models of how the world works in accounting and how to represent information in accounting. And therefore they're able to take this generalized model that they've extrapolated and apply it to new problems and be successful there.
Yeah. And the really neat part is you start to see students who have high tolerance for risk and students who don't have very much tolerance for risk. And they'll argue with each other about, well, if we pull this off, it'll work out really well. And the others are really conservative in that. And so that's a real neat part about the discussions.
Do you also get into definitions of risk? Because as you're aware, risk is likelihood of an event occurring plus its impact. Do students evaluate risk along those lines?
Sure. I've introduced it through the time cycle / life of a product. I can remember when a Chevy Impala was a brand new car. Well, it's still around. My BlackBerry phone that I had for 3 years is nowhere to be found. And so we talk about the life cycle, and that's how I introduce risk to it. If I'm going to introduce a product that's going to last 2 years, I got to make some money on that pretty quick, and just got to have a quick turnaround. If I produce a product that have a life cycle that goes 10, 20, 30, 40 years, then I can take some more risk with the capital investment.
That sounds really interesting, Carl, and it sounds as if that by the end of the course, the students have moved beyond the mechanics and have come up with some insights of their own. Do you also maybe have an assignment where the students capture those insights or that generalized knowledge that they've extracted from these exercises that you go through?
Well, there's two things that I do in my class. One, the Davis Managerial 3rd edition textbook has a continuing case, and it goes through all 12 chapters, and so we use that throughout the course. But the other, I use discussion forums, and it's always funny because students I'll ask students if they've ever had a discussion forum in their class, and they have, but it's been English or philosophy or something. And I have 7 discussion forums in the course. And the last discussion is a letter to the next class. And in that, they tell them what resources work the best. Well, I'll start over. What 3 key things they learned from the course, what resources helped them the most, and what they would do different if they started over. And it's really neat seeing some of the answers, especially what they learned. And a lot of feedback comes in terms of how they learn how to use Excel to think, how they learn to go beyond an answer and analyze an answer, and a lot of regret and hindsight.
Kyle, this knowledge capture that your students do to and pass on to the next class, are you seeing over time that the capability of each course, each iteration of the course is leveling up as students draw upon the learnings from the previous courses?
Yeah, they'll jump into resources a lot quicker. I also do this at midterm, and I do the same exercise at midterm, and it's amazing how many students will go, wow, I didn't know that resource existed. And so that kind of jump starts them. I do that around chapter 5 out of a 12 chapter course, and so they start picking up new resources. So it really works. And the other thing it does for me is the vast majority of my changes that you saw, if you look through the Success with Canvas video I produced, those have come out of students. I mean, the majority of things that I put in there came out of student recommendations.
Now, Kyle, this must also mean that you have to adapt the course over time. And there's sort of in my mind, I can think of a couple of issues there. One of the things that universities tend to like is to be able to compare results. You know, the standardization of courses. So each student's experience from one year to the next year, you know, this set of students and that set of students is similar, so they can compare grades. But it sounds as if your courses are evolving over time. I imagine that the material and your approach evolves over time, and you're getting higher quality results. So how do you handle this issue that some universities have of, no, everything has to be the same from year to year so we can standardize and compare, you know, last year's B plus to this year's B plus, and we know it's the same thing?
I think the key thing, Clemson is a great place to work. I've been there 6 years now. It's my 27th year teaching. And we have a set of core values, core concepts we have to cover in every course. But we're left with a lot of freedom on how we make that happen. And the bottom line comes down to, if my students perform in the next level, then they're good to go. You know, I teach financial accounting, so when my other faculty get my students at this level, as long as they're performing, we're good to go. The same thing with managerial. So, you know, as long as we cover those core concepts, we've got a lot of freedom in how we do it. And one of the things I've been doing recently, I go to a lot of workshops in Clemson, and I've gotten in connection with the marketing majors, the management, and I'm working on discussion forums with them that are focused on a marketing concept or a managerial question that's not so much accounting, but more in the managerial aspect. I've got econ majors, graphic communications. So I'm trying to expand my discussion forums to embrace their major concepts.
Kyle, we're almost at the end of our podcast here, and I'd like to ask one follow-up question and then get into your takeaways. And the follow-up question is that given this systems level thinking and this ability of students to think why, and perhaps even think as if there is no box. Have you been able to do some sort of evaluation years later, maybe run across the students, see how they're doing, see whether this has kept with them, they've taken this thinking forward as they've graduated into an organization, and maybe it's really paid off for them?
I started teaching in a computer lab in 1997, and ever since that time, I've had so many students come back and thank me for helping them. I always correct them and say, I didn't teach you how to use Excel, I taught you how to think with Excel. But how that enabled them to go into the workplace and really analyze a problem very efficiently and quickly and be able to make changes. So that's one of the big things that's come back. Students come back all the time and say, wow, I did an internship for my first job, and what we did in class is what I have to do at work. The other thing, I do a project that's the students have to create their own personal budget. And so, we do budgeting and managerial, so they have to create a budget, 5-year plan. They have to research cost of living. They have to research everything, electrical bills, and they create a budget. And I have a lot of students who will come back, and they're still using that budget. So they left with a tool that helped them get out of college and move on and buy their first house and stuff like that. And that's really moving when we see that come back.
I can imagine, yes. Okay, I was wondering now whether you could give 1 or 2 takeaways for our listeners there, and if possible, focus on something that they can implement in the near future to take into account all that you've suggested in the last 20 or so minutes. Particularly, I like this idea of this foundation that you're putting into place for students to have that creativity, innovation, and adaptability as they get into new types of situations and problems. What are some of the immediate things that our listeners can be doing to put into place some of your insights?
A lot of faculty are really scared to implement Excel into their classroom. They typically do like I do. They give them a blank worksheet, and you spend the class time not being very productive. So you've got to create templates, and if you can share contact with me, I'll share templates that I use. But I give them all the data in there. And so to jumpstart and have a takeaway, if you produce a template with the key data in Excel for the student, then they can analyze it. They don't have to try to input it. They're analyzing the data, and then they have the chance to discuss it and share their ideas and really talk about it in depth. So that's my first takeaway, is don't be afraid to use Excel in class. Spend the extra time. Be very careful with the layout so it's easy to follow. And that's going to take the student out of their comfort zone. When in reality, all they're doing is add, subtract, divide, multiply, copy, and paste. And then that will move the discussion a lot further. The follow-up to that is you got to have discussions about it. You can't just get the answer and say, okay, this is it. You have to let the students spend 5, even 10 minutes talking about what they produced and what that means. And I guess those are the 2 key takeaways that I have with my classes. My goal with every class that I run is I want a student to go, oh, wow, 15 minutes just went by.
Very cool. Okay, we've come to the end of our time together, and I want to thank you, Kyle Anderson, from a combined background of both academia, practitioner, accounting, technology from Clemson University. I want to thank you for the time that you've spent with us. And that's it for today's show. Thank you very much. My name is James Bowen, and we'll be back again at another time. Good day.